Hello, Fearless Gamers, and welcome to another podcast here on Fearless Games. I'm Matt the Vet, and today I'm joined by...
Matt the Clown.
James the Wildcard.
And today we have a very special guest, game designer and novelist...
Gav Thorpe.
Hello. Let me say on behalf of all our viewers, welcome on the podcast. It's a great honor to have you here today.
Thank you for asking me along. I'm sure we'll have some fun.
Oh yeah, it'll be a good time.
Oh, before we get started, for anyone here who may happen to not know who you are, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, I joined Games Workshop at the age of 19, which was 22 years ago. I worked there for 14 years as a games developer, including a time as Warhammer Lore Master, running the Warhammer game and background and system, and also as lead background designer on both Warhammer and 40k. And I've also been an author writing short stories, audios and novels for Black Library since that was created, 18 years ago, something like that. So, yeah, I've been around a while.
It's, for me, it's kind of like insane when I hear how long this has been going on, because it just never feels that way.
Yeah, it's definitely true.
It just feels like I discovered 40k yesterday.
Yeah, that's nice in a way, isn't it? The fact that it does still feel fresh.
Oh yeah, definitely. And so we are going to not waste any more time. We're going to jump right into these questions. Matt, I believe you have us going first.
Yeah, let me lead in with. I think this is probably one of my favorite questions on our list here. What I would like to know is whether or not there was a specific game or like moment in gaming, like during a game session where you're playing with somebody, that inspired you to want to get into game design as a career.
I don't think there was a specific moment. It's always something I've done. I do remember when I was probably 9 or 10 years old, and kind of playing with airfix soldiers on a friend's floor, and we made up a game. We were rolling dice to see if they hit each other, and we rolled. There was just one dice, and a 6 was a hit, and we rolled 3 dice for machine guns. So, and that was the first war game I wrote, I suppose. And I've always been involved in the creative side of it, I suppose, when, you know, making up scenarios and running campaigns and creating characters and stories and things. So I wouldn't say it was one particular thing that made me want to get into games design. The main thing was that there was an opportunity, I suppose. I applied for a job at Games Workshop, or rather I wrote a speculative letter to them and was told to apply for a particular job, and kind of was just in the right place at the right time. And history sort of went on a particular path from there.
That's cool. I was not expecting that.
That's
It's
interesting.
kind of like a core part of you. That's cool.
It's you were born to be a game designer.
Right.
I think it's one of those. I think it's one of those things people ask, particularly when jobs get advertised for, you know, a games developer or designer, particularly a Games Workshop, but in general. And I think, and you know, people say, "Oh, what should I say at the interview?" or "What should I do?" And my only reply is really, it'd be stuff you're doing anyway. If you're running campaigns or scenarios or tournaments and you're playing and just doing it, then all you're doing is kind of moving that enthusiasm across to a professional level. But it's very difficult if you want to work for a specific company, because there's so, you know, whether it's Games Workshop or Privateer or someone else, you know, you can't really say I want to work for that one person, because openings are so few and far between. I think you just get into writing or into games development and see what opportunities arise, and then, you know, as your career continues, then maybe you'll end up where you want to be, or maybe you'll end up going somewhere completely different but enjoying it just as much. So,
very interesting.
Sounds very organic. I kind of like it.
I think so. It's very hard. I mean, video games is slightly different these days, because there are a lot of opportunities, at least to get started, and there are college courses and all sorts of things you can do now, particularly geared towards video games design. But I think the sort of board game or tabletop games and role-playing and things, it's still much more, although the industry, I think, has continued to expand, and there's lots of companies doing stuff now, it's still very much, it's going to be hard work and passion that going to get you into it. There's not a formal training you can go off and do and then say, aha, I have a I have a thing, and there's not a single point of entry. You might start off being a freelancer, you might actually just be running games at a club or a tournament, or get a job in a store or whatever. All of these ways end up being stepping stones where you meet people in the industry, and who knows where they can take you. Like I say, I met Jervis Johnson at UK Games Day '93 when I started, and I had some Blood Bowl rules that I'd written, and I showed them to Jervis, who lied to me. Actually, he said, "Oh yeah, we're working on a new supplement for the game." He was actually working on the third edition of Blood Bowl. I found out when I started, but he said, "Don't give them to me here. Send them to me at the studio, because I'll lose them if you give them to me."
Right.
And so I typed them up I borrowed my mum's word processor and typed them up into a legible form and sent them to him with a cover letter, and that was it. That was, I literally, if I'd done that 3 months earlier, I probably wouldn't have got the job, and if I'd done it 3 months later, they would have filled the position. There were 3 positions going, and they would have been filled. So, and that's the kind of moments. I mean, maybe I would have ended up working for somebody else or writing in another way. I'm pretty sure I would have been doing something creative. But that particular journey of my career and being based at Games Workshop and the opportunities that have sprung from that, of being there when Black Library was created, and also then being able to write original fiction, because Mark Gascoigne, who set up Black Library, went on to set up Angry Robot, another print, and things. These connections all kind of spread out into your life. And it's one of those, it's kind of chaos theory sort of thing. Like, well, but if you can trace it back to one incident, it was that conversation with Jervis Johnson at Games Day.
Oh, okay.
That's pretty cool.
That's cool.
So I think another question I had for you, when you're on the job, when you're doing the creating, as it were, what do you find is the most challenging aspect of like games creation, world creation, that kind of stuff?
The most challenging aspect, I suppose, for me, it's safe to say I'm not a completer finisher sort of person. I'm definitely a creator rather than an editor and stuff. So actually, once that initial hurrah of kind of ideas and things have kind of been splurged out, and actually going back and refining it, and particularly where rules are concerned, because although I kind of enjoy working with systems and that sort of thing, there are people far more qualified for me to fine tune stuff. So, but actually that I've worked hard over the years to kind of develop a diligence, I suppose, that doesn't come naturally to me, to make editing passes on things again and again, to look for different things, so that I don't kind of just throw stuff out there and go, cool, yeah, I've done the fun bit, somebody else can worry about it. And being conscientious in that respect, because I like getting stuff done. I like a kind of sense of efficiency and pace, which doesn't necessarily is kind of the opposite end of perfectionism, really. I suppose it's like, yeah, it's cool, yeah, and forcing myself to take a step back, read it again, leave it for a few weeks, or whatever it might be, and making sure that I do those refinements, I do those passes again and again, to actually deliver something that's as good as it can be, as well as quick.
Right.
Exciting. So yeah, for me that's it. But that's experience as much as anything. Experience of working with myself and knowing my own weaknesses, I suppose.
Right, like a sort of discipline kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. And especially now, I mean, I'm full-time freelance now, so my time is my own. Well, such as it is these days. If I don't work, I don't get paid, and that's a very good motivator.
Right.
For being, getting stuff right in as few attempts as possible, I suppose. Learning quickly from your mistakes and what doesn't work first time, I suppose.
I used to have a friend who said...
sorry, carry on.
Oh, sorry. Let's go on.
Oh, no, I was going to say, it's that the idea that if you practice something long enough, then it becomes kind of a unconscious competence thing. And actually, what I try to do is force myself to be conscious about what I'm doing. I don't just do stuff by rote or instinct, and I make sure I'm consciously making decisions about what I write or I'm designing.
Right, so don't go off of like muscle memory, but rather like kind of sit and plan and focus.
Yes. Exactly that, and I like challenging myself. I can't, I like to push myself and try and do things slightly differently from how I've done them before, and always constantly trying to learn how to do something better. And yeah, that muscle memory idea, that sort of just being, thinking, well, I just write a story and it's just going to be A, B, C, and this happens and this is going. Well, no, actually, I want to throw in something. I want to do something different, so that for me, it's as exciting to write it, and it keeps me engaged. Then I don't want to do stuff by rote, because I know I'll get bored with it, and if I'm bored with it, the reader, the player, will be bored with it as well.
Yeah, that's one thing that's like probably one of the biggest things that you try to do with it is make sure that it's all fresh and that no one gets bored with what you're producing.
Yes, yeah, exactly, and as I said before, because I'm very much of a, sort of the freshness is what excites me, and kind of that first challenge of coming up with an idea and creating a storyline or some characters or the basis of a game system, actually following that through again and again is great, because I get to do so many different things. I get to write scripts for audios, and I get to consult on world development for video games, and all these things keep me engaged in different ways, so that I'm not just having to, even though everything's writing and designing and things, it's not the same job month after month after month. There's different challenges, writing novels, writing short stories. All of them have different challenges and obstacles to overcome, which keeps me on my toes, really.
Mm-hmm. And speaking with that, recently Warhammer Fantasy has gotten a fairly decent reboot with Age of Sigmar. And from this experience, do you prefer building a world from the ground up or modifying an existing one?
Two very different challenges, I suppose. One of the things about working in an existing world, like the old Warhammer world or the 40k universe, is there's a lot of legacy, a lot of stuff there that you have to be aware of. And over the years, things kind of get changed and contradicted, and sometimes you're trying to work out what's the right version of the background and things like that. But also there's a weight of expectation with it. People have very set ideas about how that universe works, how particular characters are, how certain things should be. But you also have the benefit of all of that groundwork done there, that there's a lot of material to draw on, there's a lot of breadth and depth to it that you can add, you can refer to in novels, and also that a lot of the readers will bring to it as well. With a completely new universe, you have none of that. Everything you create from scratch, which is great in terms of having a very open field to run around and play in, and sort of start building your own sandcastles, and to mix metaphors, and doing all kinds of crazy stuff without anyone telling you, well, that's not how it is, because in this book that came out 20 years ago, there was a different thing. But also being very aware that there isn't that depth and breadth there already, that what you're laying down has to compete in lots of people's minds with what's been developed over 30 years. What the Warhammer world and the 40k universe have accreted lots of detail and lots of gravitas, which a new setting like the Age of Sigmar can't compete with yet. People just don't have those associations. So no matter how strong the imagery is, particularly, and things like that, it's going to take time to gel in people's minds and in the authors and the creators' minds as well. There'll be ideas tried out that won't quite work, and so it's exciting and scary. I think an old background, whilst there's a lot of expectation, is quite comfortable. It's a nice, it's a pair of shoes I've worn many, many times and hiked many miles in. And although you can always go to new places with it, the Age of Sigmar is somewhere where there's lots of horizons to cross, and we really don't know what's on the outside, past those horizons yet. So that's exciting to find out what's there and see what the fans think of what we where we take them. But actually, that's a huge amount of responsibility as well. I can't blame it on Rick or Andy James to say, well, they invented that. I'm just carrying on with what they said. And the guys in the studio who are writing a lot of the Age of Sigmar background are going to be in that place of well, actually, stuff they put down is going to have to last a long, long time. So, and there's going to be, and people are scrutinising it, I think, in a way that early versions of 40k and Warhammer were never scrutinised.
Yeah, that definitely. So I can see how it would be easier to work with a background, especially like you said, you can always go, well, it wasn't me who made it.
There is a certain, blame the guy who came before sort of thing. Hey, that's how I found it. I didn't break it. But also people have got a lot of love for it and a lot of affection for the Warhammer world or for the Imperium or whatever faction. That's the other thing, of course. Age of Sigmar's introducing new factions. They might have their fans already, but they don't have the really entrenched fandom, I suppose, is one of those things, talk about the guys who've loved their armies for the last 10, 15, 20 years and kind of live, breathe it. They're going to have to find ways of kind of transporting that into the Age of Sigmar. For me, I'm a huge fan of the dwarves. They're not going to, the Duardin and Fire Slayers and other things that get referenced in the new Age of Sigmar aren't dwarves as they were before. I don't know what they're going to be honest, because I've not seen that yet either. So, I've got the same trepidation and excitement to see where those images go. But it's going to be hard for our generation not to compare it to Warhammer Fantasy Battles. But oddly enough, there will be, there'll be gamers and readers coming through for whom this is going to be their only experience of Warhammer, and we have to remember that.
Right. Yeah.
That is a good point. So, with that, you mentioned the 40K universe, and when you're writing a story in that universe, do you find it more challenging or a bit easy to write about an established character?
I suppose it's a similar answer to the established world thing, really. An established character has lots of stuff worked out. I would say it's probably easier writing a new character in terms of because you can fit them to the story in some respects, and people can't tell you got them wrong and things like that. Which is what you'll get, if you're writing about Dante or Sanguinius or Marnius Calgar or somebody. Lots of people already have preconceptions, whereas if you've invented your own Chapter Master or Eldar Exarch or whatever, then they might say your interpretation of the background's not so hot or doesn't agree with them, but actually what they're not going to say is you got it wrong.
Yeah.
But on the flip side, trying to create the same gravitas in a created character or chapter or Titan Legion or something that's not from a rule book, people will say, oh well, it's just been invented for this story, and so there's a kind of a path you have to chart, I suppose, between giving people stories about what's already familiar, so the characters that are already in their codex and that they can buy miniatures for, but introducing new characters around them perhaps that allow you to look at them in a slightly different light, away from, what's already there. The thing with novels particularly, but short stories as well, is you get to go into a character in far more detail than you ever would in a codex. So you have to look at them on the battlefield, but also off the battlefield. How do they interact with their companions as well as their enemies? All these kind of things. Questions that don't get asked in a codex. Cool bits of war gear which might have an effect, but you think, oh, actually, how does that actually work? Does it need maintaining? All kinds of stuff which might seem like a cool line when you're writing a character description in one page, but when you've got to write 10,000 words about them in a novel or a story or something, suddenly it's that scrutiny, it's that detail of how does that work in a story and not just in a battle.
I remember when I read the Purge of, probably going to pronounce this horribly, Purge of Calidus, I believe.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
Right, okay. I always pronounce the names horribly wrong.
That's fine.
When the Displacer field was introduced, and they introduced it in the 6th Ed Codex, I remembered reading about that, and I was like, ooh, that's something I gotta throw into my army right now. Just because of, how it was described, and, the dude going, I'm putting my life in my hands with this thing.
Yes, yeah, I mean, that novel's quite an interesting one, I suppose, because it's kind of one of those where Black Library and the codexes have kind of interacted with each other. So the original story of Piscina 4 and sort of Belial and Gazgul was written. I was helped write it as a supplement for second edition 40k. It was,
okay.
it was game rules and sort of like battle scenarios first, and then when I was asked to write, or if I wanted to write a Space Marine Battles book, because I already knew the story really well, and I'd come up with a bunch of the missions and things like that, I went back to that and thought it'd be really cool to chart this as a novel. So game characters turned into the novel, but there'd been a couple of editions between them almost, and things like that, and stuff dripped away as well. So yeah, or was introduced. That's the other thing about having very established kind of forces like the Dark Angels or a chapter. There's loads of stuff in the Dark Angels Codex now which didn't exist in the rules and therefore in the background when I was writing Version of Catalyst or when I was writing Angels of Darkness. And so that'll always kind of date them slightly, I think. But things like the Displacer Field, yeah, that was a piece of his war gear in the rules. And so I wanted to make sure that was represented. The same with the Chaplain and his seeking ammo and things like that. So stuff that was just cool. And then those sort of things drifted out of the mainstream background, the Codex backgrounds as war gear choice and stuff, but it's nice to see them coming back in again. I don't think it's necessarily just because of my novels, although it'd be nice to think that. But because they're nice little gritty bits of narrative, not just in a novel, but in a game. Actually, like I say, knowing what happens, it's not just a 3-up save, it's a displacer field. It does a thing, you can picture what it's doing, and I think that's the difference between stuff that's just rules and stuff that actually, even if it's got the same rules as something else, it still saves you on the 3+. Those couple of lines of background which describe what's going on, how is he saved, what actually is the difference between a force field and a displacer field and a conversion field. These are the things that people like to know about the world and about their figures and their characters.
Yeah, definitely agree, and it also helps, just like I said, just bring all the characters to life, and that's one of the things that makes the hobby, at least for me, that much more enjoyable, because I'm reading about these characters and then I'm like, ooh, I just want to make these dudes and have them. They may not have models, which makes it great because then I can just make a model of them or make a character based off of one of these guys.
Yes, yeah, I mean, and that's part of the underpinnings of the 40k universe, which is it's there to be explored and by games developers, but by authors and by gamers as well. So you can create characters, I can create characters, I write stories about them, you can, and it's always a mingling of ideas and debate and things like that. It's a living thing. It's not just tablets of lore handed down. It's stuff that actually the different elements of the painting and gaming and reading and stuff all can come together and people can access it in different ways. And
so now, one question I was always curious about is do you still actively play the war games like 40k and Age of Sigmar? And if so, which army do you play?
I have to confess that I've not played for a few years now. Not 40k and Warhammer. Age of Sigmar has certainly piqued my interest. One of the reasons is just sort of my army. I've got a Dwarfs army which I've had for many years and it's gone through various incarnations, but is looking decidedly dated now. And Eldar for 40k, again, there probably isn't a new model from the last 5 years in it, unfortunately, because I just haven't had the time and sort of headspace to do that. So I'm still into toy soldiers and gaming things, but I haven't played 40k or Warhammer. But Age of Sigmar is very, because I can see myself getting into that because I can get a few models and just get onto the tabletop and start playing. It's deliberately designed to be you can be quite magpie-like with what you want to collect and buy and put in your force, because it's kind of done away with the fairly rigid force selections and things that were in Warhammer 40k. So, without promising anything, I'm writing an Age of Sigmar novel, and I definitely want to paint some Stormcast Eternals and things in the colours of the guys I'm writing about, because I do think it's nice to have that connection, sort of knowing a little bit about how the rules work. The narrative doesn't have to be a slave to the rules, but one of the things about, going back to the question about writing in a new universe, or in this case a new game, is just trying to get power ratios in your head, just how many goblins can a Stormcast kill, and things like that. Oh, sorry, not goblins, grots. And stuff like that, again, that familiarity with the old background is fine. We each have our own narrative requirements for how powerful a Space Marine is, but we have them. Whereas actually we still find our feet for all this new stuff that's coming out and what their abilities are and what things actually look like when when one of them unleashes his magic bow of coolness and all this kind of thing. So actually being familiar with the games, even if I'm not going to be playing regularly, is going to be a good thing, and just kind of it G's me up, I think, just to get some soldiers and paint them. So probably going to start with that. Whether they'll actually hit the tabletop or not, I don't know.
I will say that freedom is what has me interested and has me keeping an eye on it, because I'm seeing some of the models they're coming out with, and I'm primarily a painter myself. That's what I really got into it for. And I'm going, man, I really want to paint some of those models, but I should probably play the game if I do it.
I'd have to say, out of anything, the new format for Age of Sigmar really got me interested, because I remember I bought a bunch of Vampire Count models going, I'm going to play this game. I'm going to get into this because vampires are awesome, and they're not sparkly in this universe, and then I kind of stopped once I started reading, like, the percentiles in the game. I was like, whoa, too much math for me.
Yeah.
And to see, when I saw the rules for Age of Sigmar, I was like, this is... go on.
Yeah. Well, that's it. I think it's, for Warhammer in particular, as a game, regardless of the actual particular edition of the game, but it was a mass battle game. It was based around large regiments of troops, which I love, and I love the look of a game of Warhammer Fantasy Battles, and I still prefer it as a spectacle, I think, to 40k, and I always have done, although 40k's kind of got slightly more gameplay advantages and you get to have tanks and stuff. But it's as a game that's quite a high bar you've got to hit before you can really start playing it properly. And properly just meaning proper sized units interacting on the tabletop. Whereas 40k and now Age of Sigmar has got just the entry level for being able to play, just being able to throw down a squad of models or the equivalent of a squad of models and play. It just makes it so much more accessible. You don't need 100 models to play. And it's not even necessarily about the cost, although for some people that's an issue. It's just time, painting, putting these things together. It takes you half an hour to set up a game and then another half an hour to break it down. And so, your 3-hour game suddenly turning into a 4-hour game. Whereas, like I say, Age of Sigmar, yeah, you want to play a game, that's cool. You've got the models that you want. You can pick and choose if something cool comes out and it's kind of allied to your faction, you can just pick it up and you're not having to worry about, well, I've got to buy 20 zombies to use this thing first.
That was actually something that was funny recently for me, was I was like, I better start picking out models and such, and start thinking of things, and then I went, wait a minute, I have demonology for my Thousand Sons. I got a Sigmar army. Because I keep forgetting the demons cross both universes.
Yeah. Oh yeah, exactly. That's a really good one, yeah. And I'm sure there's going to be some mad conversions of stuff coming out using all sorts of stuff from sort of stuff porting into 40k and into Age of Sigmar from the other direction as well. I think not that it won't necessarily get publicised much, but I think as a hobby thing, again, there's a lot of cool stuff going to be coming out. Very much.
Oh yeah, like especially with those new the Army of Sigmar stuff. Like I could see a lot of cool ideas just flowing from those models.
Yeah. So yeah, that's the idea, and it's interesting writing about them. And I say it's kind of taken me a little while to get my head into. I'm trying, people are making lots of comparisons with Space Marines and the sort of the Stormcast and things, but actually writing a novel, and it is quite a different approach, and trying what they are isn't quite the same. And although imagery-wise and kind of where they fit into the universe, there are obvious similarities. Narratively, they're quite different, and trying to get my head around how that's going to work, how deliberately not trying to make them sound like Blood Angels or Dark Angels or something. And as it develops, the different Storm hosts are going to be developing their character, just like, all the ones that we know and love kind of started off as colour schemes. The Ultramarines were the blue guys, the Blood Angels were the red guys, whatever. And those Storm hosts are going to be the same, they're going to develop character over time as more words get written about them, as fans start to choose the ones that they like and start to bring their own personality to their armies, and other stuff gets released, and a lot of it, again, what I like, a lot of it's going back to being in the background, not enshrined by hard and fast rules telling you what you have to collect.
Yeah. I definitely, that's definitely true. It's nicer to have a little bit more freedom with that instead of going, well, I can't have this, because that's actually one of the things is when I first started playing Dark Angels, I almost shied away from them when I found out in 3rd Ed they couldn't use assassins. And I was like, oh, if I can't use them, maybe I don't want to play this army.
Yeah, well, exactly. And it comes down to, I mean, it's got a bit more sophisticated now because there's different codexes and lists, and it went through the whole kind of chapter traits and all kinds of stuff. But at one point, essentially, you're saying, well, if I paint my guys white, they can have these rules, and if I paint my guys green, they have these rules. And it's like, well, that's just insane. You know, well, if I want to paint my guys white and have those rules over there, and that's where Age of Sigmar is at, because a lot of the slate has been absolutely wiped clean. You know, people can bring to it their own creativity again, I think.
Yeah, definitely, I agree a lot, and I'm excited to see how Age of Sigmar plays out in the coming years.
Oh yeah, well, we all are.
I have a very, Star Trekky-like question for you in regards to the Eldar.
Right, okay.
The Warp Spiders and the Shining Spears are the only two that don't have a Phoenix Lord. And now, we've gotten a little blurb as to where the Shining Spears Phoenix Lord is, but they never mention them when it comes up to the Warp Spiders. Is there any particular reason that they don't have one?
Well, this is my very particular take, and it doesn't necessarily reflect anything in the official background, or even necessarily what is sort of like the reasoning in the studio or in the sort of like, you know, Games Workshop itself. But it's kind of a terminology thing, because I've just released Asherman, Hand of Assyrian, which is the first in a series of Phoenix Lord novels.
Yes.
And for me, and there's a particular term. There's the Assyriata, who for me were the 6 Phoenix Lords, who were basically Asherman and his disciples. The first trained, that he picked them, he trained them himself. There was a bit of argy-bargy between them and Ara, who left, and then Karandrash came along and became the Phoenix Lord. But essentially, they were the first exiles. They were the Phoenix Lords. There's something very particular about them because they trained and where they were, and they were involved in a whole mythology of their own. From them, they went on to train other people, and other aspects sprang out of that, who would have had their first exiles, who would have had their first Phoenix Lords in that sense, who may, if it was long enough ago, have become these mythical... The Phoenix Lords themselves are immortal ideas. They're not just a warrior. They're not just an exarch, or the way I present them anyway. They're these. You know, they've been subsumed into these suits of armor that kind of steal the life force of another elder to reincarnate, and all this stuff. Which just puts them a cut above anything else in the Eldar sphere, really. So those other aspects may have Phoenix Lords who are sort of have elements of that nature or unnature, I suppose, that mythic quality about them. And some of them may just have very old exarchs, but they're not quite on that mythical level, in the same way that, you know, a Primarch is a very particular thing, and you could be a 20th founding chapter and stuff, but you're not a first founding Legion chapter. That's a very specific thing. You're very directly from the gene seed of the Primarch, and so and you kind of just draw a line under it. So that's how that's my justification for basically saying these 6, 7, depending on which one you include, are the Phoenix Lords. Mainly because they're the ones that were in that Eldar Codex, you know, when they were introduced. And it's nice because then it stops the proliferation of the idea as well, because it makes them special because there isn't 20 of them, there isn't 25 of them as and when new aspects get invented. And I think it also then gives people the freedom to invent aspects without necessarily thinking there has to be a Phoenix Lord to go along with it. It works both ways. But none of that's official. You won't read that in a codex. That's just my approach to it that I've taken over the years.
Okay, that's really interesting. I never would have thought of it like that before.
Of course, something will come out next year. There'll be a new Eldar Codex. I'll completely rewrite that or whatever, and there'll be a 10th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th Phoenix Lord in there named and with rules, and I don't know.
Or
we'll see.
But, or Fourth World will decide they want another one.
Yeah, as it goes to press. Yeah. Fortunately, they've never invented a 21st first founding Legion, so, you know, hopefully they won't do too much with the Phoenix Lords. But there wasn't any guidance. There isn't anything written down, so you can see why stuff creeps in as different writers interpret it slightly differently. So a Forge World might make a reference, or I think is it Ben Counter? I can't remember who did the Eldar Prophecy novel. There's a reference to a Walks by the Phoenix Lord in there with as a line or two, but none of that's necessarily official.
Yeah,
say unofficial either. And again, it depends what you start defining as a Phoenix Lord.
Okay. Now, with all these games, like a lot of times, back when games worked, when we used to be able to find out who was writing what codexes for such, of course, naturally, everyone would start having their ideas of, oh, well, he's writing this is going to be happening this way. What would you say is the most common misconception we as players have about your role in most gaming projects that you do?
I think the thing to remember when anything's written for 40k or Age of Sigmar is that the first decision made was to make a miniature, which isn't necessarily the decision of the games developer. Certainly isn't these days, and wasn't when I was in charge of Warhammer and at a stage. Then there were certainly discussions and influence and kind of range planning and things about what miniatures to be made and stuff. But ultimately, there's a big commercial process that makes those decisions about what's getting made in plastic and what's getting done in certain numbers and stuff like that. All of which then influences how it's going to be packaged and how that then should be included in an army. Again, Age of Sigmar, that's kind of gone out the window a bit, but back then, sort of like if something's was going to be in plastic, then you wanted it generally to be, you wanted numbers of them. They were going to be a core choice or troops or things like that, and there was so doing things a certain way in terms of manufacturing process influenced how you were going to include it in a game, and so within that constraint, within that part of being part a large design and manufacturing process, that's when you then try to include stuff in the most characterful way possible. But also there are briefs on the background and a lot of inherited stuff, again, particularly with Warhammer, but also 40k, of things that have been around for a long time and work in a certain way. I remember the real difficulties we had with Night Goblin Fanatics, which are a fantastically characterful part of the Night Goblin army, and these mad guys whirling around and things. And it always worked in a certain way, but the rules kept escalating, and actually to do them properly was going to take about 3 pages of rules and a thing. And we just made a decision: we've got to change them. We've just got to go back to the basic mechanic and just change the way they work, because clarification after clarification after caveat after thing is just too much for what is essentially a very small part of the Orcs and Goblins army. So there's all those kind of considerations as well of expectation, I suppose, of how certain mechanics should work and what was in the previous army book or codex and why has it changed. Whereas actually what you're trying to do is create something that should just be taken on its own merits and balances. And I suppose, the other thing really is there's always just the pressure of time. You just never have enough time, even if you've got 6 months to work on a codex and you can get as many games in as you can. And even if you've got external playtesters and things, it's nothing like 10,000 people playing a game a week for the next 3 months. There's just going to be stuff. That it doesn't matter how hard you try, there's going to be stuff thrown up. And when it comes down to it, particular players who want to finesse or exploit or break things or whatever are going to have much more time to do it than you do, because even if they don't do it in the 3 months, then they've got another 3 months and another 3 months and another 3 months. Luxury, you have to publish at some point and be damned as a games developer. And you can't. One of the things that was often said was, well, you can do FAQs and things, but you just get onto a treadmill of constant updates rather than making decisions and working on the project you're working on, rather than looking over your shoulder at the stuff you were working on 3 years ago. So that's the main thing, I think, is that sort of the reality of publishing a game which is going to be used by thousands of people across the world who want all sorts of different things from it, whether they're painters who want to be able to collect what they want, whether they're hardcore strategists who think that and it's all about list building, whether it's just the guys who want to reflect the background, or somebody just started, somebody's been playing 20 years. All of these people have to get serviced by the same game system and the same army list.
Right. Please everybody, as it were.
Exactly. So you try and please as much of the centre ground as you can, really, I think is the idea.
Yeah.
Well, I got a question about a more personal project for you, if you don't mind.
Yes.
I was wondering what the inspiration for your Empire of the Blood series was.
Right. Yes, that's the original fantasy trilogy available from Angry Robot Books. It was. I'm a big history fan. I wouldn't say buff because I hardly ever remember any of it, but I like reading history and things. And particularly at that time, I was reading a lot about Julius Caesar and Philip and Alexander of Macedon, and particularly the Macedonians and the idea of Alexander is known as Alexander the Great, and he did create this immense empire and things, but actually so much was laid down by his father Philip and things. So that these three guys kind of coalesced into this idea of a character in my head who became the general in the trilogy Ulsard. And there was I've forgotten what it is now, but there was a particular term the Greeks had for Alexander, which essentially went, and it was only ever applied to him, to no other person, which was about destiny. It was almost like he was destined to be the greatest, and so this idea that the blood, this kind of inheritance, and this character Ulsard feeling a destiny, not in a prophecy, a bad fantasy sort of way, but in and of himself, feeling that he's meant for greater things, even if he can't express it himself, and having an ambition and a tireless hunger almost that he can't explain. And that was kind of the seed for the idea of, wept for there was no more of the world to conquer kind of thing. And then after that, lots of story gets added into it, and ideas of kind of the metaphysics of the magic of this world because it's fantasy. And then throwing in a bit of whimsy, like there are no horses in it, because it was going to be my first original fiction series after leaving Games Workshop, so I wanted it to be this. It was not going to be medieval. It was going to be in no way related to anything you might recognise in Warhammer. So it's Bronze Age, sword and sandals, no horses and knights and castles. It's phalanxes and spearmen and guys riding giant cats and lizards and things. So to keep it kind of fantastical.
So you could say it was one of those, wait a minute, I don't have to write about spacemen or elves?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I can swear and have sex as well. There's plenty, so there's quite a lot of that. One of the talking to Mark Gascoigne at Angry Robot when we were sort of discussing ideas for it, and part of, I wouldn't say the brief, but part of their vision, I suppose, for Angry Robot, which they were setting up at the time, was some of their stuff to be sort of like the written version of a HBO series. It's Rome. I always said this is like a fantasy version of Rome. Of course, they've actually gone full circle and they're doing the fantasy version of their own called Game of Thrones. But they're that gritty, bloody, violent, but also political intrigue and sort of what these days is termed kind of grim dark, I suppose. But actually, just the realities of real politics and bloody warfare and that side of things, as well as the slightly more, and there's good humour in there and everything as well. I was having a laugh with some of the characters, but it's interesting because I wrote it as a series, and a few people have asked, would I go back to that world and write again? And it's kind of difficult because the story itself breaks the world in certain ways. It doesn't really exist at the end, so it don't have to be beautiful stuff. And that, again, going back to what I was saying earlier, I like creating things, I like starting stuff and then breaking it, basically. A lot of my stories, Last Chances or The Legacy of Caliban or The Crown of the Blood, stuff's pretty broken at the end of it and you can't continue the story very deliberately. So some of the ideas I'm working on now for some original fantasy are much more worlds that I can keep coming back to again and again. So and set stories in them again and again, I suppose, without necessarily killing off all the characters or breaking fundamental parts of the world in order to finish the story. So.
Right.
Awesome.
I got a question actually, is just from one writer to another. When you do your writing, is it purely digital on like a computer or a laptop, or do you sometimes just have like a pen and a pad and you write a chapter by hand and transcribe it later?
I can't. I can't write like that in terms of the actual prose itself. I do almost all of my planning sort of in an analog style. I've got not so much lately, but I tend to use more pads and stuff. But I've got a big flip chart that I often use to draw when I'm trying to work out fairly especially over trilogies and stuff, trying to work out the arcs and the plots and things. So you need a lot of surface area to draw lines between things and kind of almost mind map type stuff. But yeah, no, I tried writing, with a pen and writing actual prose, and I think I've become so used to writing at a keyboard that that's almost part of the process now. I type. The words come out of my fingers and I'm typing and I'm not really thinking about it in that sort of way. And also I'm so out of practice of physically writing that after 20 minutes my hand's sore.
Yep. I have the same problem.
I can't remember how I used to write essays and things at school with pencils and pens. These days it's like clawed T-Rex hands. So yeah, lots of notes and kind of mad diagrams and even little bits of biography and things. But yeah, the actual sitting down, putting the words down is always at the keyboard now.
Okay. Is there a particular place where you write? Like, do you have a special room where you do it, or is it just wherever you happen to be sitting?
No, I have to be quite disciplined about it. So in theory, I work 9 till 5 with an hour off for lunch. I really don't, obviously. I'd rather be far more productive. But I have an office which also doubles as our spare bedroom. So depending on who's staying as to when I actually get to start in the morning. But yeah, so I've got a desk, I've got a PC up there. I stick my iTunes on. Depending on how hard I have to work, I'll put on my internet blocker and try and get a couple of solid hours in that way. And it's all about just time every day, 2-3 hours every morning. At the moment, I'm in the wonderful position that I usually look after my son in the afternoons. So I'm basically working half days at the moment, which is lovely. But it does mean I have to work very diligently in that time I've got. But once I've done all the planning and I've got the scenes in mind and stuff, I'm actually quite quick. So that's a few hours a day for a week, and the words add up once you get to. It's one of the advantages of doing it full time rather than scraping 500,000 words in an evening and a couple of thousand over a weekend. That can really draw out a process. Whereas if you're doing it all the time, you can really build up a head of steam and stuff.
So, who's your favorite author?
Yeah, see, I'm terrible at favourites because I just flip flop. Right, the sort of, I suppose I don't have one favourite, and I have lots of authors who I consider influential, although I've never tried to emulate them. So obviously, when I was growing up, I was reading Robert E. Howard and Lovecraft and Tolkien and Michael Moorcock and David Gemmell, and I love Andy M. Banks, and it's quite a lot. Gene Wolfe stuff was Andy Chambers introduced me to Gene Wolfe stuff when I first was kind of joined Games Workshop many years ago and said that, you've got to read the Book of the New Sun. This is, if you want to understand 40k, read the Book of the New Sun. Things like that. So at the moment, who am I reading at the moment? I'm reading a lot more graphic novels at the moment. I'm reading lots of Mike Mignola, sort of Hellboy, BPRD at the moment. That's where I'm kind of getting my story kicks at the moment.
Nice.
Yeah, why not? Well, they did an amazing bundle deal for all of the non-Hellboy stuff digital for $99, so I couldn't not do it. I've got all to read. Yeah, so and there's sort of slightly less mainstream stuff, still quite popular stuff like Saga and those kind of comics as well, Black Science and things like that. So, but that said, I've just been to a convention where we picked up a big pile of books, some freebies that are in our goodie bag, and we just bought a load of stuff. So I've got that to read through, and I'm reading a lot more short fiction. I'm writing away from sort of Black Library. I'm trying to write a lot more short fiction at the moment. So there's the anthologies I've been included in, and it's cool reading the other people's stories in those. But also just going back to the time thing about painting or whatever it might be, watching movies and stuff. It all takes up our leisure time is the currency these days, is what everyone's after. And actually, short stories are that nice hit of being able to sit down for maybe 20 minutes and read a story and have a complete hit, rather than I just can't contemplate the time to read a massive 10 doorstep series, or whatever. So I'm kind of at the opposite end. I'm having stuff that's a few few thousand words long. And that's really good fun, and it's nice and eclectic. You can read some horror and some fantasy and some sci-fi and some cyberpunky stuff, and then there's this other weird stuff going on there, so that's kind of where my favourites are at the moment. It's all over the place, obviously.
Understandable. It's hard. I can see it's like when there's so much really awesome stuff out there to read, it's really hard to like really pin down stuff like that when there's just so much great writers out there to read out nowadays.
Oh yeah, exactly. There's just never, I'm never going to have the time, even if I gave up writing and made £1 million somehow and could just sit down and read as much as I wanted. There'd still be something, there'd still be something else to read pile. It's a never ending thing, because keep writing stuff as well. So even if I was to finish, in 10 years' time, what other cool writers are going to have come along in the next 10 years? What ideas that we've not seen yet are going to come out?
Yeah, that is true. It's a never-ending cycle of enjoyment when you get to read all that stuff, or try to, at the very least.
Try to, yeah.
So, with that, and you mentioned, free time is the currency that people go by these days, and obviously reading and writing is a big part of your life. What are some of your other favorite things, again, there's that word favorite, that you like to do in your free time?
Well, gaming's one, not so much on the 40k and Warhammer side, and again, just because I've sort of been doing sort of more, I suppose, under the radar sort of game systems, so stuff. I've been spending far too much time spending money on Kickstarter, backing board games and card games, and a couple of miniatures ranges. Although I don't tend to do back miniatures on Kickstarter because nearly all of them are just showing you kind of 3D computer renders, which isn't, unless somebody's proven that they can actually make the physical miniatures to a particular quality, I'm not going to give them my money, because it's part of an industrial process, and what comes out at the end has got nothing to do with, or it's got very little to do with what goes in at the start. But there are a couple of manufacturers who've been making stuff for a few years and run Kickstarters. There's one I've got. Unfortunately, I can't remember their names now. They did Otherworld, I think they're called Otherworld Ventures, who did a lot of anthropomorphic animals, fantasy adventurers lately, which is great. So they've got like stoats and badgers and mice and things as fantasy, clerics and fighters and wizards and stuff, which is a bit bonkers, but it's just that's where I'm at. It's kind of I'm trying to revert, I suppose, to my 12-year-old self of just buying cool stuff and wanting to paint it. Another one I'm painting a bit. One of the early Kickstarters I backed was for it's called World of Twilight, Chronicles of Anirau, or something like that. And again, it's a very different vibe to sort of Warhammer and stuff. It's much more like Jim Henson style creature. It's a very softer fantasy. I mean, it's still a war game and stuff, but the aesthetic of it's not brash and loud and stuff. It's quite nice, and it's almost got a almost rural feel to it. I don't know if that makes sense. But anyway, so just painting the different stuff, but also I'm trying to find time to play stuff on the Xbox, although mostly single player stuff, because I'm no good to play multiplayer. I just get completely destroyed.
I avoid the multiplayer scene whenever I can.
I used to play loads of Call of Duty, and then a few years ago, I kind of fell out of that with not having the time to do that sort of thing, and I just wouldn't dare kind of get into a multiplayer first-person shooter these days. And then reading. I say actually deliberately trying to read more at the moment. It's one of those things that I'm trying to get my. I went through the last few years watching lots of great television, but actually at the moment I'm off TV and I'm trying to get more into reading, I suppose.
Now you mentioned the Xbox before. Is there a particular Xbox game that you enjoy more? Like after even if you have nothing else to do, you could always go back and just play that one game.
One game, and not at the moment, I suppose. What I'm playing at the moment is the Tales of the Borderlands from Telltale Games.
Okay.
And I played their Walking Dead game, which has got the first episodes of that, which was interesting because as a gameplay experience, it's all right. It's not the best game, but as a storytelling, kind of almost an interactive story, it was exceptionally harrowing in places because it was The Walking Dead, and making kind of the decisions you make is one of those that really do come back to haunt you later and things like that. So that's kind of fun, and it's one that I can just dip in and out of. You know, I don't have to be good at it. So if I don't play it for a week, I don't get rusty because although there are slight action elements to it, it's mainly a decision-based game. That doesn't change. So that's quite nice if to just kind of have fun with a story for a couple of hours. That's how I used to play lots of Call of Duty. I quite liked. I play quite a lot on the iPad. I got a lot of board game ports, you know, sort of like Catan and Stone Age and you know, sort of stuff like that. So it's much more. It's things that aren't hectic. You know, things I don't have to rush myself to think about really, because at the end, after a day tapping away at keys, I need something to unwind, which isn't going to stress me out, which most games these days do. That said, you know, there's the Total War Warhammer looks really interesting. I'm not sure my PC will run it, but but I love the Total War series. And, you know, I played nearly all of them, so I may end up getting hooked back on that. I don't know. And then no novels will get written for about 3 months.
That's one thing. I've never been a Total War fan until they did until they announced the Warhammer one. Right. Then I was like, okay, I'm interested in that. And then I got hit with the Battlefleet Gothic Armada game.
Yeah.
And because that's like probably my favorite GW game of all time is Battlefleet Gothic.
I love it as well, yeah.
And then Inquisitor's been announced. It's just like been so much stuff out there.
Yeah, exactly. It's interesting. I mean, since GW opened up the licensing, which kind of came with the fall of THQ really, because THQ had a big broad 40k license, whereas now they kind of, since that went by the boards, they've been able to license out smaller parts of the background, and so some of it's going to the kind of mobile gaming, but there's still the big kind of PC games going there. There's also the is it Vermintide or something? Yeah, the sort of Warhammer-based one, which is looks interesting as well. So that's still lots of interesting titles coming out over the next year or two. The things that people will play, and I'll say, it looks really cool. I've got no time.
Not enough time to do it all.
My plan is I work really, really hard for the next 5 years, and then I can retire.
That would be awesome, just to be able to do that and go, bam, and then boom, free time to just finally catch up on everything.
I know. I don't know though, because it's kind of worrying, don't you think, if you actually had that time and then and you still wouldn't be able to do everything. So and then it's that kind of, if I can do this, then my life will be complete. And you go, well, no, that's kind of negative thinking, really. But just enjoy the gaming and the reading and the everything else that I get to do now.
It reminds me of we used to have this old lottery commercial where it's just a girl sitting in a courtyard and she goes like, what do fish think? and then it just goes, if you had all the money in the world, what would you do?
Yeah, that's pretty much it.
One question I do have that came up actually from just recently announcements from Forge World and such is, there are times where you would maybe possibly like write a character or write about a vehicle, and then it pops in as a new miniature. What's that like feeling behind like when you find out, oh, you made something, and then to find out that it's going to be put into the game?
It's pretty cool. I think in sort of like Forge World terms, and with the Heresy stuff in particular, because that kind of the first quite a few of the early Heresy books they weren't very adventurous in terms of depictions of the Space Marines. Not deliberately so, but it was establishing the story and everything else. And then when Forge World started doing their books, they started pushing the idea of what the Legions had and the great big toys they had to play with, and thinking and making them much more different in terms of their gear from 40k Space Marines have. And that kind of spurred the writer. We just talked about this our Horus Heresy meeting said, no, we've got to up our game here. It's like, we've got to come up with some really crazy stuff as well that they've got that's disappeared over the last 10,000 years. And trying to outdo Forge World in the cool stakes. And that's when we really started inventing stuff. And one of the ones is I think recently was the Mastodon, which was just I think it might have been mentioned by name somewhere else, but it was never described or something. But in the Lion novella, I decided to kind of flesh out what it was, and it was this big, 4-tracked, huge. I mean, in my head, it was more like a Jawa sound cooler, but the thing they've got, obviously, it's got more of the aesthetic of the Land Raider and stuff. So the Land Raider's big cousin, really. But it's cool. And you just go, writing the Raven Guard heresy stuff, and I've thrown in loads of stuff to try and basically tease them in to try and make some of it. Like stealth out Shadow Hawks, and there's these things called Whisper Cutters, which essentially are kind of like boarding missile things, but atmospheric, which are kind of going under the radar with 10 space marines hanging on the outside and stuff. And very kind of Legion-specific stuff. I think with the gear, that's cool. With characters, it's always a bit more tricky. I remember way back when Pete Haynes did I think it was 4th edition Imperial Guard Codex, and he did the Last Chances, and he wanted to put Cage in it. And Colonel Schaefer's always been a part of the Last Chances, so he's always had rules, and he wanted to put Cage in it. And he said, and he asked, and I said, well, I wasn't quite sure, really, because, one, it's hard, it's rendering down a character from a novel into some stats in a game, which was, would it capture the essence of him and stuff like that, or things. But also, it was, I suppose, with that particular instance, for me, the idea was there's always been lots of different teams of Last Chance. There's not been one defined team, and the guys that are in the Codex are deliberately a stereotypical team sort of thing. They're always presented with these kind of nicknames and code names and stuff, because they weren't supposed to be individuals. They were types of people that you get in the Last Chances, and they get wiped and Schaefer gets some more. So put in Cage, a particular named individual with his own name, sort of moved against it. I think we agreed in the end that Cage should go in, and it was good promotion for the novel, basically. But it was weird. But in some places, just inventing. I suppose it's not for me, because I've worked in the studio for so long. I'm used to kind of creating stuff that appears in the background because I did it directly. So in a way, having to do it via the novels is cool, actually, because I can't assume that stuff that I invent is ever going to hit anyone's tabletop. So actually, if somebody's inspired enough by that idea for them to want to make a toy soldier about it, whether it's a hobbyist or Forge World or Games Workshop, then that's really cool. As opposed to, I was in charge, I could put it on the release schedule. Which is kind of, abuse of power, really.
As they say, with great power. With
great power comes great dwarf miniatures. Hopefully. So, that was the idea, anyway.
Alrighty, because sadly we are running out of time for now. So we will wrap this up here. Again, thank you, Mr. Gav Thorpe, for joining us today on the podcast. We really appreciate it.
I've had a blast. I'll be happy to come back sometime.
We would love for you to come back, and hopefully we'll be able to do that. We'll have to keep in touch with that.
We'll do that, definitely.
And so until next time, thank you all for listening. And if you haven't yet, check us out on Facebook, check us out on our website at fearlessgames.com, and also keep a lookout on YouTube for new videos, podcasts, more interviews. And until next time, Fearless Gamers, this is Matt the Vet.
James the Wildcard.
And Matt the Clown.
Joined with us with Gav Thorpe.
Stay fearless.
Take care, everybody.
Have a good one, guys. Bye.